but on rare occasion, don't be afraid to be spontaneous if that's not something you often do. Because one time she was at a conference and she ran into the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. A friend introduced her and she asked him, I know this is insane and you're probably going to laugh, but I have a podcast about this. And would you ever consider, I'm actually podcasting tomorrow morning from my room here in the hotel. Would you at all ever consider making a few minutes of a guest appearance? And she just knew he would say no.
Welcome to Launch It, the Podcast Maestro, your gateway to becoming a thought leader in your field. Dive into the world of elite podcasting and master the art of influence and inspiration. And now, podcast personality, award-winning author and actress, Anne Scottlin.
Hi, welcome. Welcome back to Launch It, the Podcast Maestro. I'm Anne Scottlin, the Podcast Maestro. Today we're diving into even more fun stuff. We have been having such great topics in the last few episodes, but today we're going to talk about something that a lot of people want to know. How can I be confident in choosing my podcast theme? So a lot of people know the general subject they want to talk about. When it gets a little more specific, which we want to be, then it's a bit of a challenge. So I'm going to talk about that, how to pick your podcast theme if you haven't already. And if you have, you might want to hear this anyway, because there's some more, some pointers and checklists you might want to use to test the theme you already have. So I'm going to talk about that and share a bunch of examples with you. But first, as always, my purpose of this show is to help you become a global thought leader. And I do this by helping you create a world-class podcast. So most experts in their field never get around to launching their own podcast, even though that people tell them every time they go somewhere, people are like, you should launch a podcast. You should do a podcast. They're like, yeah, I really am. I'm going to, you know what? I'm going to do it. But eventually when the rubber meets the road, they just like, oh my gosh, it's too hard. I don't have enough time. It's complicated. I don't have all the tech set up. It's time consuming. Or they worry about the cost, the production, or it's literally just nerves and fear of public speaking, because there's some incredible introverts out there with a great message to share that the world would love to hear, who just need a little support to get it together and find a space that makes them comfortable. So that is what I do. And in recent weeks, I've shared my experience in a bunch of different areas, including the art of storytelling, whether or not to choose a video or audio podcast production style. That was a fun one. How to find your perfect podcast voice. Last week, we talked about mics 101, podcast mics 101, how to choose the best mic for your podcast. And I suggested mics I've used and recommend. Or don't, and why. So if you happen to miss that episode, you might want to pop back in there and check it out. And I invited you to send in your questions. So today I've pulled 3 lucky winners who sent me their questions, and I'm going to answer them. Actually 2, because I got so excited answering those, I ran out of time to get the third, so we'll have to do that next time. 2 questions on how to create compelling content, how to choose your theme. How do you choose your podcast theme? So first of all, I want to just thank you again for joining me today. And please like, subscribe. Please shoot this link over to someone else who would enjoy it. If they just need a smile today, want to hang out with us for a few minutes, or if they are thinking about a podcast, or if they're doing one, or if you think they would be excellent at a podcast and you want to get their attention, this is a great way to do it, right? So the 2 questions today have to do with choosing your podcast subject. And then a second question is deciding on, it's a little bit separate, but not entirely, deciding on guests versus no guests. Those are 2 separate questions y'all sent in. And so we're going to go through those both. So first, choosing your podcast theme. So many people run into questions with this. They just stay so general. That's usually the challenge, is people stay too general because you can't niche out. I can't tell you how many invitations I get to guest on podcasts, on other podcasts, that are about good, inspiring stories. Now, I'm the first person in the world to say I'm a huge, huge, huge fan of good, inspiring stories. But just having good, inspiring stories is not enough in most cases, unless you're already a celebrity or already a focused figure to get people to tune in and keep listening and get those high view numbers. So the question is, how do you do that? How do you choose a theme that is more specific? And it's just like in any business, you basically have to niche out. You have to find your environment. So let's pull an example out of thin air. What would a niche be on good, inspiring stories? How about good, inspiring stories for young mothers who have had to deal with the trauma of a miscarriage? Boom, there's your topic. Now you have an audience who needs to hear your message, who needs to hear the stories you or your guests are sharing. You've found a niche of people, and you're like, well, but there's so many people in the world. And first of all, you realize that is a very big audience, if you don't already know that. I'm a woman and I know that. I don't fit into that category, but I have lots of friends who do. So I know that this is a real need and a real audience. And if you are a thought leader in the world of therapy or maternity or a medical doctor, many other things, that even emotional wellness that could address that issue, now you have a niche. Also, this is going to help you attract sponsors, because if you just have, I have a show that makes people feel good, sponsor me. Again, unless you really already have the gravitas of a name or a brand that is highly recognizable, it's just almost impossible to get people to sponsor you. So, but I'm going to go back to who asked the question, because I really appreciate his question. This is Walter from New York, and he said, "Hey, Podcast Maestro, I'm feeling a bit lost in the podcast wilderness here. I know what that feels like. I've been playing around with different podcast ideas for weeks, but I can't seem to settle on a subject that really grabs me. How on earth do I choose the perfect topic for my podcast when the possibilities seem endless? Help me out of podcast purgatory, Anne." Okay, Walter. Hi, Walter. Thank you so much for your question. Yes, I absolutely get this. I have been there myself, and I've been in the trenches many times because I've had many podcasts on a variety of subjects that still sort of fit within my area of expertise. Also, your expertise changes over time. So, Walter, to answer your question, I recommend you measure your topic selection against 4 things. One is your passion. Do you love your topic? I'm going to use the good, inspiring stories that so many podcasts say, oh, we just have good, motivational, inspiring stories. Again, not a bad thing. Really excellent. Very needed in the world. But does that really get your own personal juices flowing? Does that really get you like so excited that any nerves you have, you're like, I don't even care. I just cannot wait to do this podcast. Does it really motivate you? I invite you to close your eyes right now. I'll close mine. If you're listening, you can't tell, but I am. All right, close your eyes for just a moment and think about, what are 3 things that you feel extremely passionate about? It could be health, animals, wellness, children, families, profession, politics, religion. Those are all very general. And then narrow it down, a specific topic that you could teach, something that just like makes you want to jump up and down and say, I don't care what I have to do. This is the topic that I want to motivate people with. And this is the topic that people need. So if you find that, even 3 of those, even 1, for example, right now, you can open your eyes. I hope you didn't close them if you're driving. Uh-oh, I should have read off my my liability disclaimer first. Anyway, hopefully you're smarter than that. If something really gets your juices going, lights that firecracker under you, basically, that is the direction to lean. Because sometimes people will go, oh, but this is such a dry topic. Well, if you write manuals for electronics, which a lot of people do for a job, the average person in the world might think that's a pretty dry topic. But honestly, if you were to be the only person with the leading killer podcast about writing handbooks and all that stuff, see, I don't even know anything about it. I never read them. I'm sorry. Then you have the potential of becoming a thought leader in your field. So even if the subject matter is dry, what gets you excited? Now, maybe you don't get like thrilled to death about that topic and it's your job, but maybe you happen to know that you're really, really good at it. Either you've done it for a long time or you have breakthrough ideas around it, and you see how you could improve the way things in your field works. So either way, be sure you have passion around it. Not everyone is all kinesthetic like me. Woo! Sometimes, I love my scientific clients, my academics, my CEOs. I love all you guys. And gals. So what you need to do is just find something that really drives you, though. And of course, second, Walter, your expertise. So what's your passion? What's your expertise? If you know absolutely nothing about a subject, it's probably not time to start a podcast on it. Now, you can learn it. You can become an expert in that and then diversify down the road. So if you have something like, oh, I have always wanted to do XYZ, but I don't really know anything about it. I just love it. I'm so excited about it. Well, then let's say you love watching competitive horse jumping, right? And you love watching it on TV and you love horsey people. And you're like, this would be so much fun. I would love to do a podcast on that. But maybe you aren't a writer or maybe you don't know much about the sport. Then it's time for you to really dip in, get your feet on the ground, go interview people at events, talk to people, read books, listen to podcasts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So be sure you have expertise in your area. And if you don't, pick something you're already really, really good at. And then you can always develop more expertise later. Excuse me. So your audience interest is the third thing. Research your audience in advance. We've talked about this. I've talked about this several times already on this show. Research your audience in advance. You need to do consumer polling. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can sound fancy and time consuming. It really isn't, but something is better than nothing. So start researching your audience. You might have an audience in competitive horse jumping. I'm just picking this out of thin air. I have no idea why. I love horses. I know why. It's because I was just at Lexington for the opening season weekend, which was a blast. And I got to totally dress up and have some fun drinks. And it was a really fun weekend there in Lexington at Keeneland, Kentucky. So that's why I'm thinking about horses. I don't race or ride horses. I have ridden horses, but that is not my area of expertise. So, but maybe there's already a podcast or a magazine or a blog that already massively highlights the area you would also like to highlight. And if that's the case, and it already has millions of followers, for example, see if you can't find a derivative, a branch of their subject matter, something they touch on occasionally, and make that your area, because you have to have a competitive edge. Otherwise, everyone will always and only listen to that one big show. I exaggerate, but this is just for example, right? Okay, so make sure it's your passion. Make sure your theme is around your area of true expertise. Check your audience interest. And lastly, keep your theme specific, as I've been illustrating, but also flexible enough to be spontaneous. Yeah, and I'm going to tell you a story at the end about how beneficial that can be. So keep your theme specific, but flexible enough to be spontaneous. Also, if you're just like, I don't even know where to start with picking a subject, you can scan your trade journals, digital magazines, but always, always give credit. Please, you are not a world-class podcaster or a world-class podcast if you don't give credit where credit is due. You always look like the bigger, better person by giving credit than by withholding credit and trying to make yourself look better. And people who know about the topic will know. So they will recognize a quote that someone else has coined and has appeared in magazines. They will. So don't cheat yourself out of clients. Don't get bad reviews that way. Always, always, always give credit. That was just my little pitch for giving credit. All right. So Walter, let's move into a couple of these examples. Expertise and audience. So I'm going to tell you about Mark, who has a podcast theme that's about navigating finance for entrepreneurs. Okay. So, and the example is going to be expertise and audience, how he used those two areas to really nail down his theme. So Mark's a financial guru. Gosh, I would like to work with him as much as possible. He has a real passion for helping entrepreneurs thrive, which is spectacular. He also has had some really good stocks lately. Okay, Mark's podcast dives into the intricacies of financial planning, He helps clients with investment strategies, wealth management, everything like that, but tailored specifically for entrepreneurial business owners, entrepreneurs. So that is what his podcast is about. That's what he does, rather. That's what he does. Gosh, getting ahead of myself here. And he has unique experience. He's had all kinds of challenges in his own career. He's had to weather economic downturns, so much market volatility. You guys know the drill. And also he has some natural gifts. He has empathy. He has a personality that is warm and inclusive in an area where often people see it as a dry, and often people very fearful around topics on money. So a very friendly, open, warm person is just exactly what they like to hear. They feel comfortable. They can just hang out in the space. But he's also candid, and he gives really good actionable insights. So he has absolutely a checkbox in expertise. And then when he came down to actually selecting the theme for his podcast, he decided to go to the audience, though, because there were so many themes. And this is where a lot of you who are already CEOs, leaders in your field, academics, your theme is huge. You want to start, I'm a medieval history junkie, right? So if I'm like, I'm going to do a podcast on medieval stuff, that's my silly voice. I could do it on 150, 200, 300, just get me started. 500 topics on medieval life, more. So how do I decide? Because there might be some that really call to me, but also what would people be interested in listening to? So Mark decided to tap into his audience's pressing concerns. So he reached out to his community. He got on social media, sent a few personal friends and advisors an email, and just said, hey, would you all, ladies and gentlemen, submit me any burning questions you have about finance? And also, if I had to pick one more specific area around finances, what would you want to know? And he got flooded with responses, which gave him an endless supply of topics for episodes. Now, I will say that changes over time, everybody, because of trends in the market, trends in politics, everything. So you don't always want to use the topic from 3 years ago that someone suggested then, or that you got a percentage of suggestions on. Continuously poll your audience and see where they are and what they're looking at right now. And you should already know this. If you have your pulse, my brain is going backwards today. If you have a pulse, you're good. That's true too. If you have your finger on the pulse of your professional environment, then you should know what is trending now and what isn't. So try to stay in the know. And as I said, poll your audience. And if I'm managing and producing your podcast, for example, when I'm working with my clients, my team and I help do a ton of that for you. You say, hey, I have a lot of passion in X. I have a lot of expertise in Y. And can you find out what the audience might want to hear? We work with your social media. We work with you. We do polls, and we find out, versus, comparing and contrasting different platforms as well. It's a whole nother episode for another day. We do that for you so that you can minimize your time investment. If you're someone who's an extraordinarily busy professional and you don't want to do this as a time-consuming hobby, but you want to do this as a way of becoming a thought leader in your field without that extra time, then we can help you with that too. Okay, so another one, Walter, that I want to move into is similarly passion, expertise, and experience. So David has a great podcast about health and wellness for busy professionals. And, I think he could even niche down a little more. That's just me. Love you, David. But that's what his podcast is about. So he's a health enthusiast. He became a podcast host, and he really wanted to demystify wellness for busy professionals. So how do you practically, in practical terms, keep your health and fitness high, especially if you have very low amount of time? So David's podcast covers a whole wide range of topics: nutrition, exercise, of course, stress management, mindfulness, the things you would expect. And a lot of this comes from his passion of his own personal journey, because his own holistic health wasn't always smooth sailing. He had been a workaholic in a dog-eat-dog executive field. He really struggled to prioritize self-care. So he really gets the challenges that his audience faces. He gets those firsthand, and he talks about them a lot on his show. So his authenticity is reliability that resonates with listeners who are looking for these practical tips for their wellness and helping integrate that in crazy schedules. So when he was looking for his theme, he kind of went back over his own journey and the pivotal moments that had really shaped his perspective. He went over a lot of stories. He uses a lot of stories. We've talked about that, how to create amazing stories for your podcast, about his own personal struggles and triumphs. And he really crafted it down to overcoming burnout and reclaiming balance. And I think that's what he should make the whole theme. It might even be time for a rebranding, overcoming burnout and reclaiming balance. Because now we know exactly, not just health and wellness for busy professionals, health and wellness for busy professionals who are burnt out and feel like their life is out of balance. This is a more specific group. There's millions and billions of busy professionals. How about even more specifically? So his very first episode, he was so fortunate, it struck a real chord with listeners, and he got so many responses and testimonials and questions for follow-up and asks for future topics that he was really, really off to a good start. So Walter, I hope that helps you. And then I had mentioned at the beginning, because this episode is going crazy fast, but I do want to mention this one more person, Sarah. She, because I talked about spontaneity. I said at the beginning of the episode, I said, be sure that you have a theme that is niche, but also create enough flexibility so you can be spontaneous. So I'll just tell her a short version of her story. So she's a great executive coach. And I would say her area of expertise is really dissecting leadership strategies, right? So her podcast is all about sharing insights and interviews with a wide variety of top-level executives, but more specifically, always for startup companies that have just gone public. So this is her niche, startup companies that have just gone public. And she gives her audience kind of that behind-the-curtain look to see what successful leadership looks like. And she's been a consultant for these kind of startups that have recently gone public for a long time. She pulls from her extensive lucky woman, extensive network of CEOs. And a lot of you may be like this. A lot of you already know that you have an audience in the wings, that you have an incredible amount of reach, of contacts, that it would be easy to get a lot of the people you already know to tap in and listen to a few of your episodes and get them hooked. So if you have that kind of extensive professional network, absolutely going to take advantage of that in getting your podcast up and running and really making it world class. But even the best of the best get stuck. Podcast hosts often trying to figure out if they can still be flexible and stay on theme. So, for example, Sarah is a very structured person. She plans ahead. She has her guests scheduled like 3 months out, at least sometimes more. And being spontaneous with her is always kind of like, no, because everything's all set up. I don't want to disappoint anyone. Everyone's assigned to a different day. Granted, that is professional and that is the way it should be. But on rare occasion, don't be afraid to be spontaneous if that's not something you often do. Because one time she was at a conference and she ran into the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. A friend introduced her and she asked him, I know this is insane and you're probably going to laugh, but I have a podcast about this. And would you ever consider, I'm actually podcasting tomorrow morning from my room here in the hotel. Would you at all ever consider making a few minutes of a guest appearance? And she just knew he would say no. And he said yes. And she was just like, oh my gosh, I've got to cancel my guy for today. I've got, but it was fine because being willing to be spontaneous, this guy would not, you could have been, if she could have even scheduled him, which was almost certainly no, even though she has a great show, it would have been scheduling 12 months out and dealing with all his staff. But she talked to him directly. He was staying in the hotel. It was before the meeting started the next day that he was speaking at, and he said yes. So don't be afraid to just reach out and ask, right? But allow yourself to have that spontaneity. Now, his company hadn't just gone public. But he had experience in his past when he'd worked with companies that did. And he also just had kind of that big dog level of experience, which is looking back. She asked him, what would have you done differently? And what would you recommend for, professionals in this industry that are just going public and with their companies? What would you recommend? So being spontaneous can have, as you can imagine, no one thought she was going to get this name, and her podcast, that episode was the highest number of hits she ever got. So always be willing to be spontaneous, but also have normal structure. We'll talk more about that soon. We're going to talk about another week upcoming, how to create structure and manage your time around podcasting. So these 3 approaches, back to Walter. Now, first of all, firsthand experience is the best. You can find guests with expertise, and audience engagement, including your audience in the theme of your show and then where it goes, keeping it flexible. Again, that's more for another day. I'm totally running out of time right now. So my clients are super lucky because I can find guests for them. I can help them get their shows scheduled. If they know people, they invite some, I fill in the blanks. So there's a lot of ways to streamline it for them. And sometimes that's just the comfort factor, is not feeling like you're having to do it all yourself. There's a lot of pressure. What if something comes up? What if you're sick? What if you have to travel? If you're a busy business professional already, there's going to be lots of times where you can't shoot your podcast. So how do we deal with that? Those are things we talk about next time. So Colin from Denver, I am sorry. I was going to answer your question about guests versus no guests, but now I see that's going to have to be a completely separate episode, which is lucky because you're going to get your whole question answered for the whole episode. I think it's a great theme the more I think about it. And we're out of time, and I want to give your question a totally fair share. So we're going to come back to that topic next week. We're going to talk about having guests on your podcast. Your guests can be a flop or they can be a phenomenon. So how do you figure out the magic recipe to have great guests that help your show and don't kill it? So thank you again, everyone, for sending in your questions. I will keep pulling from them. Remember, in choosing your podcast theme and structure, think about your own interests, your passion, your expertise, your audience, and goals for your podcast. Another great topic. What and why? Why and what of your podcast? Really specific. What are your goals? What's the intention? Lots of people forget to look at that as well. So please come back for those episodes. We're always streaming. That's on Wednesdays, 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. GMT. Please email me your questions or send messages on my website, annescottlin.com, or leave questions here on whatever platform you are watching or listening today so that I can respond to those. You can email me directly, contact@annescottlin.com. And I will read your questions. I will make sure that my assistant gets all your questions to me, and I will take a review of them and answer the ones that are fitting my current theme, my current niche, and what my audience wants to hear. See what I did right there? So I'm here to help you build a world-class podcast and make you a thought leader in your field. Please come back and see me. Share this link with someone. Do me a favor. I would sure appreciate it. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you again next time. Cheers. Bye.